We are here to talk about the next big thing, which appears to be a sovereign debt crisis breaking out in Europe, which requires the attention of the United States Congress both in the short and long term. In the short term, this crisis that involved a $50 billion IMF bailout for Greece could encompass a number of other countries, requiring the IMF to respond. But that response may eclipse the resources of the IMF. We have seen this movie before, for example, with the 1982 collapse of the Mexican currency, and that then involved a U.S. taxpayer bailout to prevent a global financial contagion. In the short term, I believe that we should have congressional hearings to bring greater transparency to the financial situation of Greece, Spain, Portugal, Ireland, Italy, Latvia, Romania, and Hungary, with a detailed analysis of the remaining $268 billion that the IMF has to lend. In the long term, this is a warning for our own country and its economy and the debt of the United States. That's why Congress should hold hearings on this to expose both the short and long-term danger. It's a call to action for the U.S. To cut spending and to bring our own house in order as we respond to the new sovereign debt crisis. I'd like to hear from Andrew Bush, Global Finance Strategist for BMO Financial.
Thanks for having me here. Clearly, this is a very hot button topic for the markets. Just to go over what happened this weekend, it was this $110 billion bailout for Greece. $30 billion came from the IMF, $80 billion came from the rest of the European Union. A couple of interesting things that are happening with that. $30 billion more in austerity cuts for Greece. 2014 is when Greece is supposed to meet their 3% deficit to GDP. I think the interesting thing for me with the situation in Greece is that this is the largest bailout of any country ever, and it's almost twice the size of what happened in 1997 with South Korea, and it occurs for a population that's about a fifth the size of South Korea. So you can understand the size of what's going on there. Just some interesting numbers that to put into perspective and where the U.S. is at. For Greece, prior to this crisis occurring, their fiscal balance in 2007 was minus 4%, 2010 is minus 9.8, 2011 is minus 10. For the United States was 2007 minus 2.8, 2010 minus 10.7, and for 2011 minus 9.4. So I think the thing that we can learn from the Greece situation is how quickly the markets can turn against you and how similar the United States is to Greece in our deficits. The Congressional Budget Office really just recently released the assessment of the U.S. Fiscal structure, and it's going to exceed $700 billion over the next 10 years. The debt has doubled. The debt has increased almost 20% in the last 2 years, and is expected to double to over $20 trillion by 2020. That's clearly very disturbing. And working with another American Action Forum expert, Doug Eakin, he and I came up with 2014, or between 2014 and 2015, is when we anticipate the United States losing its AAA rating. And I think that is significant because it's a little bit in the distance, but the key is action must be taken now to avoid that. Otherwise, it will be extremely expensive, and we will see a recession, and we certainly will see higher unemployment from where we're at right now.
Thank you. And now Professor Randall Crozer of the University of Chicago.
The chairman of the Federal Reserve had just recently said that the U.S. is not on a sustainable fiscal path. We need to take some very important actions and need to take them now. We are not like Greece yet, but it is a very important warning flare that has gone up to say that we need to do something now. You don't want to wait until there's a crisis to then try to deal with it. That only makes the transition much, much more difficult. Whenever you have a situation of very, very high debt and increasing debt, and not a good way to get out of that, that leads to higher interest rates, that leads to lower capital formation, leads to lower productivity growth, and lower overall economic growth. That's exactly the situation we don't want to be in. That's a situation that Greece has got itself into. As Andy had said, there are a number of the statistics really do not look very good for Greece because they have to take a very sharp and abrupt response when it's too late. let's try to do something in advance. Let's try to work on the situation now. And I think it's extremely important for the Congress to be focusing on this today and not wait until 2014 or 2015 when the markets may start to be questioning the sustainability in a much more direct way for the U.S.
The sovereign debt crisis, as it breaks out, will be first felt in the floor behind me, where a center of expertise exists in Chicagoland. This directly affects the economic livelihood of one of our top employers. But we already saw with announcements that the Greeks had lost their credit rating, then the Spaniards and the Portuguese. The U.S. stock market fell by 2 percentage points, impacting the retirement savings of hundreds of millions of Americans. That's why it's necessary for us to look at this problem right now. I'm particularly concerned in the immediate future on the short-term issues. What is the situation of Spain? What is the situation in Portugal? Are the IMF resources adequate? Is the United States prepared to act to make sure that this problem doesn't expand beyond the current Greek crisis that we see?